Good afternoon. My name is Chris Paxson. I'm Dean of the school, and I'd like to welcome all of you here this afternoon. I have to say, this is a really special treat to announce the speaker today because he's one of our own, and I think one of our alumni who most clearly exemplifies the mission of the Woodrow Wilson School, and I don't say that lightly. So William J. Lynn III graduated from the Woodrow Wilson School with an MPA JD in 1982. His law degree was from Cornell. And he's gone on to just a simply spectacular career in government service. He's served under two presidents, 5 secretaries of defense. He's been an aide to Senator Kennedy. He's also been a senior defense industry executive for 7 years at Raytheon. And most recently, he just stepped down as Deputy Secretary of Defense at the U.S. Department of Defense. He was there from February 2009 until just last October. While he was there, he led the DoD's efforts in cybersecurity, space strategy, energy policy, so really important innovative issues. He's also written a lot. He co-authored a book, Toward a More Effective Defense. He has numerous articles in Foreign Affairs, so if you like a speech, you can go back and read his writings in the Washington Quarterly and other places. His career has also been recognized by numerous awards. So if you go through his bio, he has 3 Department of Defense medals for distinguished public service, a Joint Distinguished Civilian Service Award from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and other awards from various organizations. So please join me in welcoming him. He's been here for 2 days. He's been talking to students. He's been in classes. He's been out to dinner. He may be tired, but it's been wonderful to have him here at the school. So join me.
Thanks very much. Well, thanks very much, Dean Paxson, for that kind introduction. And it is good to be back at the Wilson School. And other than polishing the wood, I'm not sure they've changed this room in 20 years. In fact, most of it, except the mailboxes are now where the library used to be. So I found that confusing that there's no longer a library here at the I was told now it's in another building, but glad kept that. As Chris said, I just stepped down as Deputy Secretary of Defense, and whereas that sounds like a great job with a great title, if you think that, you've never been a deputy. It is a job that where everything seems to land up that doesn't belong somewhere else. So what happens in the Department of Defense is we have 5 undersecretaries in charge of all the functions. And if there's an easy or an attractive issue to be dealt with, they actually deal with it, they make a decision, they issue a press release, they brag about it to the secretary at the staff meeting, everybody's happy. If there's a really ugly issue with, and by ugly issue I mean there's really 2 choices. There's a bad choice and a truly horrible choice. Those issues, they push up to the deputy. Now, once in a while, a sexy issue will slip through that screen. When that happens, what happens then is the secretary reaches down. He says, "No problem, I got that. You don't need to worry about it, big guy." I explained all this to Bob Gates looking for sympathy, and after he stopped laughing, he said, "Yeah, I was a deputy twice. I was Deputy National Security Advisor, I was deputy at the CIA, and you're right, it stinks. Can't help you." So if I seem a little bitter, it's because of that job. And what I'm going to try and do is focus today on the central challenge that we face in defense planning, which is how to manage a drawdown in defense spending responsibly without endangering our national security. And let me start by saying it'd be preferable if we could defer this challenge until a later date when we've completed the drawdown in Iraq, when we've managed a transition of the security mission from ISAF forces led by U.S. forces to Afghan forces. But unfortunately, the deficit crisis does not allow us that luxury. We need to begin putting our fiscal house in order immediately. And indeed, that fiscal challenge is itself a matter of national security. Because our security begins with a strong economy, and our ability to exert global influence will be threatened if we're not able to reduce the deficit and keep our federal deficit within sustainable bounds. No great power can project military force in a sustained manner without a strong economy. Our economy is the wellspring of our military might, and it is reeling currently from a wide imbalance between revenues and expenditures and the expenses of 10 years of war. With deficits now approaching 10% of the economy, strong measures are needed to ensure its long-term health. Achieving this is going to require painful cuts in all aspects of federal spending. Everything must be on the table: revenues, entitlements, domestic discretionary spending, and defense spending. Although reducing the defense budget cannot alone solve our deficit problem, it must be part of the solution. It's not plausible, programmatically or politically, to exclude the 20% of government spending encompassed by defense from deficit reduction efforts. So the challenge we face today is to manage this coming slowdown in defense spending wisely and responsibly. This requires making judgments about the nature of our future security environment, which is an exceptionally tricky business. As that great strategist Yogi Berra once said, predictions are difficult, especially about the future. In fact, we have a very poor track record of projecting when, where, and against whom we will fight. Secretary Gates indeed has described that record as perfect. We have never gotten it right. So there's one area, though, that I'd argue our predictions have a better record, and that is with regard to the future of war itself. That is, how wars will be fought, what technologies will be transformative, and which tactics will be effective and successful. And that's what I propose to spend the rest of the time on. These nations that have accurately predicted trends in warfare emphasize maneuver warfare over fortifications, they bought aircraft carriers instead of battleships, and they understood the paradigm-shifting nature of nuclear weapons. In order to sustain the right defense capabilities in the coming decade, with the coming defense spending slowdown, we need a similarly considered understanding of future warfare trends. For most of human history, we fought our battles on land and at sea. It was only in the last century that the terrain of war spilled into the air and underneath the sea. Space figured in conflict just 2 or 3 generations ago, and now, most recently, we find ourselves operating in and defending our cyberspace. In that time, warfare, first transformed by the Industrial Revolution, then by the Atomic Revolution, is now being revolutionized by the information age. This is the national security environment in the 21st century. Diverse actors and capabilities acting simultaneously across multiple domains with more interdependencies than ever before. The full scope of these 3 revolutions and the extraordinary transformation they precipitated was witnessed by a man who we paid tribute to earlier this year. Frank Buckles was 110 years old when he passed away in February. He was the last surviving veteran from the First World War of the nearly 5 million who served. The story of his life and how warfare changed during it give us some insight into the future strategic environment. Born in a barn by lantern light, Buckles bluffed his way into the Army at age 16. Weeks after he enlisted, he set sail on the ocean liner Carpathia, the same ship that rescued the Titanic survivors. In France, Buckles saw the horrors of trench warfare firsthand while driving an ambulance on the Western Front. The tide of history swept over Buckles again in 1941 when the Japanese invaded the Philippines, where he was working as a shipping merchant. He was held prisoner for 38 months until the Army rescued him and his fellow prisoners in a daring parachute raid. The very week he was rescued, the design for the atomic bomb was finalized, ushering in a new era of warfare that eclipsed industrial might alone. Buckles went on to farm cattle in West Virginia. There he rode his tractor until he was over 100 years of age. But even at that age, he participated in the next great transformative revolution, the introduction of the information age. Buckles was one of the few, perhaps the only, American born in the McKinley administration to have his own Facebook page. The three revolutions that Buckles' life encompassed brought an avalanche of military technologies and introduced whole new dimensions to warfare. The implications of these past shifts for the military have been profound. The issue for us to consider is what capabilities and what programs to protect in a defense drawdown and what course future technology trends are going to take. In that context, I'd offer that three strategic trends are going to dominate the future of warfare over the next decade or so. They're lethality, duration, and asymmetry. Let me go into each of those in a little bit of detail. Each of these trends has implications for how we design our defense program, and each, if not carefully managed, could weaken our security. The first and most prominent trend in the global strategic environment has to do with the access to lethality. Previously, when you looked at the range of threats we faced, the more capable the potential adversary, the higher the level of lethality they possessed. For centuries, the most economically developed nations wielded the most lethal military power. Secondary actors on the international stage possessed second-rate capabilities, and developing countries and insurgent groups had little or no access to the highly lethal technologies. Today, that linear relationship between economic and military power no longer holds. Terrorist groups with few resources can mount devastating attacks. Insurgents can defeat our most sophisticated armor with fertilizer bombs. Rogue states are seeking nuclear weapons. And some criminal organizations possess world-class cyber capabilities. The three revolutions that Buckles lived through have granted low-end actors access to high-end capabilities. Lethality at the low end of the spectrum can rival that at the high end. As a result, both sophisticated and unconventional opponents pose credible challenges to our national security. This change in lethality has increased the risks we face and diversified the range of threats we must be prepared to confront. Defense planning must reflect this development. Our military must be able to confront both high-end and low-end threats. We must have a portfolio of military capabilities with the maximum possible versatility across the widest spectrum of conflict. We have decisions about how to size our forces for these disparate contingencies, but we must equip for both high and low-end conflicts. In other words, we will need both fifth-generation fighters and counter-IED technologies. We will need both long-range strike capabilities and special operations forces. The increase in lethality across the threat spectrum means we cannot prepare exclusively for either a high-end conflict with a potential near-peer competitor or a lower-end conflict with counterinsurgency forces. Because our ability to project force is challenged by either scenario, we must maintain capabilities to meet both. The second strategic trend is the increasing duration of warfare. For several decades now, since the end of the Cold War, we have assumed conflicts would be relatively short, and that is how we planned, for intense but ultimately short battles that yielded decisive results. Desert Storm was the prototype, a month-long aerial bombardment and a 100-hour ground campaign with clear transitions between conflict and post-conflict phases. This construct does not fit our current reality. For most of the past decade, we have been fighting two wars. Each began with an intense combat phase, but then as the adversary persisted, the transition between conflict and post-conflict became unclear, and the scope of our mission expanded dramatically. Our deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan have now lasted longer than the U.S. participation in World War I and World War II combined. The stress this places on our forces turns out to be far more challenging than the intensity of the initial kinetic phase. A central concern for the department, then, is managing the burden the duration of conflict places on our troops, their families, and the national treasury. This trend also has important implications for force planning. We must plan to sustain long-term commitments for a range of plausible conflicts. Because duration becomes as important a driver of planning as intensity, we must maintain enough force structure to rotate units through long deployments. We need the ability to scale up force structure for longer conflicts, and we need the longer-term costs of extended conflicts must be considered in our overall strategic calculus. The third trend in modern warfare is the increasing prevalence of asymmetric threats. Battlegrounds used to be a meeting place of like-on-like forces, cavalry versus cavalry, armor versus armor, and in the Cold War, nuclear versus nuclear. We generally faced enemies whose framework for the use of force was similar to our own. Our challenge then was to develop superior capabilities and tactics within that framework. But this like-on-like paradigm is disappearing. The American military is dominant by almost every objective measure. There are very few, if any, militaries that can or will challenge us directly. Yet we are finding this very dominance causes our adversaries to become more creative in their approach. Today, adversaries can defeat us only if they sidestep our construct for the use of force. Our adversaries must depend on asymmetric approaches that target our weaknesses and undercut our advantages. So insurgents such as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Iraq avoid engaging our military in direct force-on-force engagements. Instead, they use IEDs and assassinations as their weapons, and they hope to use the longer duration of warfare to simply wait us out. And unconventional forces are not the only ones to embrace this asymmetric approach. Traditional powers have also taken this same approach to developing their military capabilities. Anti-access and area denial strategies are perhaps the most vivid example of the asymmetric approach in conventional conflict. Rather than confront our substantial conventional advantages in power projection, some nations are pursuing ballistic missiles that seek to push our forces further from the battlefield and anti-satellite weapons to blind us. In this way, asymmetric tactics are being built directly into conventional capabilities our forces may face in the future. The source of the rise in area denial and anti-access tactics is the proliferation of precision strike weapons. From Desert Storm to the present, the United States and its allies have had a relatively exclusive access to sophisticated precision strike technologies. But over the next couple of decades, that technology will be increasingly possessed by a wide variety of nations. This diffusion of precision strike technology will have a cumulative effect. It will enable these anti-access and area denial strategies, thereby creating challenges for our ability to project power to distant parts of the globe. To address these tactics and defeat these strategies, we need to develop a range of capabilities, particularly missile defense and long-range strike. The ability to strike targets worldwide is an important deterrent against aggression. So we need to invest in long-range strike systems that will allow us to penetrate defenses and deliver munitions worldwide. These systems include electronic attack capabilities, more advanced intelligence and surveillance platforms, and probably a new long-range bomber. Asymmetric tactics are also spreading beyond the traditional domains. Potential attacks in cyberspace best illustrate the growing asymmetry in warfare. Internet technology increasingly underpins both our military and economic strength. But in turn, this reliance on IT has created new vulnerabilities. Those wishing to cause us harm no longer need an industrial complex to marshal deadly force. Advanced weapon systems, like a fifth-generation fighter or an aircraft carrier, require major investments in research and development. They require a production base, and they require technological sophistication. In contrast, cyber capabilities have a relatively low barrier to entry. A small number of highly trained programmers using off-the-shelf equipment can develop very toxic tools and deploy them to great effect. The cyber threat is maturing in two dimensions. First, its absolute effects are moving up a ladder of escalation. To date, we have primarily seen cyber tools that are used to exploit information or disrupt networks. We are only beginning to see cyber tools that can cause physical effects. But tools that can cause physical destruction are out there, and the history of warfare will tell you that seldom if ever has a weapon been developed that's not been used. So I think we have to anticipate offensive cyber weapons are going to be used in future conflicts. The cyber threat, though, is also intensifying in a second dimension. Presently, the highest levels of cyber capabilities reside primarily in nation states. But because our military power provides a strong deterrent, most nation states have no more interest in conducting a destructive cyber attack than they do in bombing us. The risk for them is simply too great. So even though nation states are the most capable actors, they are the least likely in current circumstances to initiate a destructive attack. Terrorist groups, however, have no such hesitation. With few assets to strike back at, they are hard or impossible to deter. If a terrorist group gains a disruptive or destructive cyber capability, we have to assume they will strike with little hesitation. So it's my belief in cyber we have a window of opportunity to act before we see a marriage between the most malicious actors and the most destructive technologies. We need to continue moving aggressively to protect our military, government, and particularly our critical infrastructure networks. The bottom line is that the cyber threat and other asymmetric threats mean that we cannot become complacent with our conventional superiority. Just as World War I showed the obsolescence of cavalry and World War II the battleship, we may be surprised at how rapid are developments that we simply cannot foresee today. Let me draw to a close by saying that in predicting the future, I do proceed cautiously. I don't have a crystal ball. I do agree with Yogi Berra. But I also believe that we can make informed judgments about the future of war by looking beyond specific scenarios to the trends of warfare and the historical forces that drive them. The three trends that I have just described, the increasing access to lethality across the threat spectrum, the longer duration of warfare, and the growing prevalence of asymmetric threats, all pose challenges to our ability to project military force. They are each in different ways the result of our entry into a new era of warfare, one driven primarily by the overlay of the information age atop the industrial and atomic revolutions. They can and must inform our defense planning. At this moment, in this fiscal environment, we need to take the long view about what strategic trends are important. And that brings me back to Frank Buckles. In his lifetime, he saw firsthand the impact of the industrial age on warfare in World War I. He witnessed the dawning of the atomic age during and after World War II, and he lived to be a participant in the information age. The 16-year-old farm boy who fought in the First World War and survived the Second lived to see the impact of each of these revolutions in warfare. During the same period, Frank Buckles also witnessed an extraordinary series of U.S. military innovations, from the biplanes to UAVs, from machine guns to precision-guided weapons, from telegraphs to satellites. Buckles watched these innovations help our forces maintain and expand their edge against potential adversaries. Now the challenge for us is to similarly navigate our nation's fiscal circumstances without disrupting the capabilities of the world's most effective military force. For a decade since 9/11, we've had the ability to meet new security challenges by simply increasing the resources available to the Department of Defense. We will not have that luxury for the foreseeable future. Accordingly, we need to make the right judgments about the future of the right judgments about the nature of our future security environment. We need to invest in the right capabilities and to design a force structure that addresses the trends in warfare I've outlined today. And we need to relentlessly adapt our technology and our doctrine as we see threats evolve and mature. If we do these things, we will ensure our forces are ready for the future of war, even in this time of fiscal austerity. Thank you. Happy to take your questions.